everyone. I'm Deirdre Bolton. Thank you for streaming with us. White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan saying Russia now has all the forces it needs to conduct a major military action in Ukraine. He also negated reports that Russia would wait until the conclusion of the Olympics to invade.
We are in the window when an invasion could begin at any time, should Vladimir Putin decide to order it. I will not comment on the details of our intelligence information, but I do want to be clear. It could begin during the Olympics, despite a lot of speculation that it would only happen after the Olympics. As we've said before, we are ready either way.
The White House is issuing an urgent call for Americans to leave Ukraine after key diplomatic talks between Russia and Ukraine have broken down. For more, we bring in right now ABC News senior national correspondent Terry Moran. He is live in Ukraine. Also national security and defense analyst, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East, Mick Mulroy, and ABC News reporter Elizabeth Schulze. Thank you to all of you for being here. Terry, I'm going to start with you. You are on the ground there. We did hear Jake Sullivan say, we are ready. He said the West is united and that obviously U.S. citizens should depart ASAP. You are there. Is it starting to feel scarier, more imminent? What are people telling you?
Yeah, it's surreal. That's the word to use. It's Friday night here. The word of the White House statement coming out on this hit right around dinner time, people finishing up their dinner time. And it is a lively Friday night in Kyiv. The restaurants are full, the pubs are full. It feels like normal life. But you are absolutely right. I got here last Saturday, and in the days since, the mentality has changed. The feeling in the gut, you can sense in a couple of ways. First, the government has changed its tune. When I got here, the people we talked to, Ukrainians, they said, we've been living this for a long time. We've seen this movie before. We know how it ends. You guys are new. You're freaking out about it. And the government was saying, this is just an information war. Putin is trying to intimidate us with these forces. It's very different now. The tone has become very grim on the part of the government, and you can sense in people, especially the expat community, they are now getting the word in government after government after government, not just the United States, the UK and Norway and many other countries are now telling citizens to leave because of the sense that Vladimir Putin has the pieces in place. Nearly 60% of his combat battalions from all over Russia are surrounding Ukraine. There's the Navy in the Black Sea with amphibious assault ships, and it's time to go, is what countries are telling their citizens. So you do get a sense, amid all the ordinary Friday night good times that people are having, that the subject is not very far from people's minds. It's in their hearts. People are making evacuation plans, checking out routes, and making the decision that they need to. The expats, the Americans and others, should we go? We talked to several Americans previous to tonight. There's no, we're going to stay. But the urgency of this warning, immediately, it could happen any day, and backing it up with claimed intelligence that they say they can't share, that I think is going to get people attention. You can feel deep down the ground shifting, the shadow of war lengthening over this city and this country.
Yeah, Terry, amazing that you are there. Obviously, be safe. We did hear the urgency from Jake Sullivan. Basically, you have 24 to 48 hours if you're an American citizen, and essentially this idea that there is no guarantee that the U.S. would be able to help people get out later. Mick, I want to pick up on that point, as Terry just alluded for us, and then also this idea of a false flag. We heard Jake Sullivan speak about this again, that it is possible, and I know we've talked about numerous possibilities, but it is possible that Russia somehow responds, quote unquote, to a false flag. How does that fit into how you see these developments?
So first of all, Deidre, it is very alarming to see and hear these reports of this compressed timeline where we could see an actual invasion within 48 hours. I think it is exceptionally important to tell Americans that they need to start thinking about getting out now, if not leaving. This invasion would likely be started with cyber attacks, electronic warfare, which would seriously disrupt communications, then airstrikes, very robust airstrikes, and then artillery. And there's some discussions about how close some of these major metropolitan areas are the border, for example, in Belarus, about 250 miles to get to Kyiv. So once this starts, it's going to be very difficult for people to get out. And as the White House just said, they're not going to send troops in. So that is something that I think we need to amplify. To the point of your question, I don't think that the White House would be saying this potential false flag if they didn't have specific information that that is what they intended to do. So I think by putting it out, it will deflate, if you will, any attempt to do this. If we see something like that, I think it should be looked at in light of this as being a false flag operation by the Russians, to then initiate, claiming that it was not theirs to initiate.
Speaking of deflation, Elizabeth, I want to bring you in on this because we heard Jake Sullivan said the West is united and whatever Putin does with Russia is going to set up an enormous amount of tension with China. He spoke about the collective GDP of those two countries, the GDP of the U.S. You follow the global economy very closely. How do you think this is factoring into the calculations all around?
Well, Deirdre, this is a really important point because we've seen this strengthening of the relationship publicly between Russia and China. At the Olympics, they made a point of saying that they are united, specifically on the economic front, as we are seeing these threats from the U.S. and NATO allies of severe sanctions, economic penalties, export controls. There is a concern that China could kind of step in and fill some of that gap, strengthening its trade ties with Russia. But what Jake Sullivan said was important here. He said that ultimately he does not believe that Russia and China can make up for the gap that the rest of those sanctions from other European countries and the U.S. would impose, that ultimately there's just too much pull from those other key economies to have enough of an impact that China would really kind of double down here and only really go on the side of Russia. But ultimately, that's, of course, the message they're trying to send from the economic perspective, that the U.S. and NATO are prepared to institute these types of penalties that would be so crippling, which really we didn't see in the past in 2014 with the situation in Crimea. They're trying to say that this time it's going to be even more, that Russia does not want to see what these types of penalties could do to its own economy.
Yeah, Elizabeth, that's a great point. I heard Jake Sullivan say that as well, meaning, yeah, they're not going to be able to, China cannot make up, in theory, at least the punishment, economic punishments that Russia will face from a united West. Terry, when you're there and when you're speaking with people, do most of the people, most of your sources there, do they feel more aligned with the West or with Russia?
There's no question that the people in this part of Ukraine in particular, but also in most of the rest of Ukraine, including those who speak Russian as a first language, they don't want to be governed by Moscow again. They had that for a long time, and they wanted to be their own country, first of all. And second, they wanted to join the West, to align themselves with the West. And that is a very popular feeling in this western part of the country, but even in much of the rest of Ukraine as well. And so this is essentially Putin's pushed all his chips into the center of the table, because if he loses Ukraine, other near Russian countries might get the same idea, see that they can do it too, and that would diminish Russia as a world power. He's been talking about this for decades. He wrote a 5,000-word essay earlier, or late last year, in which he talked about how Ukraine shouldn't even be its own country. It should be a part of Russia. That's its natural position in the world. So he set up an ideological justification as well as everything else.
Terry, I want to bring Mick back in because our team at the Pentagon has just learned new information that another 3,000 troops are headed to Poland from Fort Bragg over the next few days. Mick, as somebody who's been in numerous rooms for numerous conversations such as these, what does that say to you?
So they could be a multi-purpose force. They could be there to assist in the evacuation of U.S. Citizens out of Ukraine. But they could also be there to bolster the whole NATO response force, which may be initiated in the coming days, especially if there's an actual invasion. So this is a good move to get troops out there. Again, and we've talked about this many times, if this invasion happens, the likelihood that it stays contained into the Ukraine is very little. It's likely to spill over into NATO countries. We need to be able to bolster our NATO allies, and we need to be able to help our citizens should they decide to leave, which they should.
Yeah, it seems as if that is the case. Terry, I want to go back to you quickly, though, because you began to speak to this idea that Putin is making this big bet, and it seems as if he is making a bet on a fragmented West, or at the very least, a West that cannot coordinate. Today, we know that President Biden convened a call with nearly a dozen European, Canadian leaders to talk about the situation. What are the chances that Putin did not calculate a united West?
Well, he's a person who likes to have options, and I'm sure the ideal option would be that he would have been able to split or weaken resistance in, for example, Germany, which is so dependent on Russian natural gas, and that they would not be able, the NATO allies and other European countries in the West would not have been able to form a front against him. It does look like that has happened. The Biden administration has succeeded in doing that. Putin himself, I don't know if you can hear it, but there's a fireworks display going off not far away. So if you hear anything, it's just fireworks for now.
Thanks for the clarification.
But for Putin also, I think the game is worth the candle. He has essentially said that Russia must be great again. That's basically his idea, make Russia great again. He recognizes, I think at this point, there's no question he recognizes the costs that Russia will incur in terms of its reputation around the world, in terms of its economy, in terms of its ability to do business and project power. But I think he senses that Russia's greatness lies in an imperial Russia. Without Ukraine, which borders Poland, for example, and is on the Black Sea, Russia is not as large a country, not as powerful, robust a country. It's more Asian, it's more remote, it's more landlocked. And that has always been part of Russian strategy. He's, I think, decided, if he is in fact going to do this, that the consequences that you've outlined are worth it.
Yeah, huge gamble, and I'm so glad you underlined that point. I mean, Russia's reputation, its economy. Elizabeth, we saw the White House press secretary Jen Psaki asked if the president will speak to the American people as these tensions ratchet up. Any guidance on when President Biden may address the American public?
No guidance yet, Deirdre. You know, they had made a point of saying there's nothing specific to announce, so we certainly can expect that the president's going to get a lot of questions about this. He's already been getting a lot of questions about this. The White House did say that the president has plans or will be having a conversation with Putin without giving any specifics there. So ultimately, the message that they were trying to send is that the diplomatic channels are still open. You know, it was notable that Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor, said that they are not sending the message that Vladimir Putin has definitively given the order to invade. That's contrary to some of the reports out there, essentially saying that the channel for diplomacy remains open if Putin decides to pursue that. Obviously, we have not seen very good progress at all on that front, but the message from the White House is to say we want to continue to engage on this front. We want to try to pursue this path of de-escalation. If that can happen, still a major open question, Deirdre.
Yeah, I'm so glad you wrapped that up, Elizabeth, because you're right. No go order. He specifically said that, right, Jake Sullivan, from Russia yet, and that the path to diplomacy is still open. He did not say these words exactly, but essentially the ball is in Russia's court. Terry Moran, Mick Mulroy, Elizabeth Schulze, thank you all for your amazing reporting. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.